Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's very good to see you all again. Thank you very much for joining today's session. Trust me, it's going to be more exciting than what it sounds like. Today, we're going to talk about how you can help your organisation to navigate the new certificate-related requirements that form part of PCI DSS 4.0.1 now it is. We've now got the 0.1. I am dialing in today live from our office in London in the UK. I've crossed the border from Glasgow to see all my Redshift colleagues. And for a change, I am on my own today. Everyone was so terribly excited about it that they did want to join, but we couldn't get availability. So I hope you enjoy the session as always. Please do let us know if you have any questions in the chat. We will come back to you on those. Let's get in. And sorry, I forgot to introduce myself for those that don't know me. Billy McDiarmid, and I run our sales engineering team here at Redshift. So, as I mentioned today, we're going to talk about the certificate-related PCI DSS requirements. Now, certificates and key management have always been a key part of PCI DSS. Has always been part of the requirements, as well as PCI DSS requirements. Certificates are requirements in a ton of other regulatory and compliance frameworks. There's a number of new changes in PCI DSS 4.0.1 that do have an impact, and organisations, if they do need to be PCI DSS compliant, will now need to adapt to these new requirements that weren't there before. I just want to touch for a brief moment, though, on the reasons why these new PCI DSS requirements actually exist. And I remember when I was doing some prep for this session a couple of weeks ago, and I was trying to think about the theme here. And I think we just want to take a step back and understand the reasons why there are requirements around PCI DSS and why it's so important. We all know that ultimately it's to help protect personal financial information. When I buy a product on one of the many geeky websites that I buy stuff from, whether I'm buying some Star Trek related stuff or whether I'm buying some new things for my cats, when I put in my credit card information to that site, I have an expectation that the merchants and the merchants who are involved in the supply chain, I have an expectation that they are keeping my payment information safe and secure, and that they're doing everything that they possibly can to keep my personal information safe and secure. And actually, PCI DSS and its various iterations have done a great job of ensuring that merchants and ensuring that organisations do stay within those guardrails. Those organisations do ensure that my personal information is kept safe and that my personal information is kept secure. So as the iterations of PCI DSS move on, more requirements have been added to continue that theme and to ensure that they continue to do that. And if we talk specifically about that, this is about ensuring that you as security people and you as compliance people can actually keep my payment details more secure and keep my payment details safe, because and keep being the hero ultimately, which is why I've got the Batman reference there. Yes, he is a hero before anyone argues that he's an anti-hero. I'll disagree with that all day. Keeping up with what is necessary to keep my payment details secure is challenging. There are always new threats. There are always new risks. Bad actors are always using new weaknesses that have been discovered in various parts of our web and email infrastructure to try and get payment information. So the only way that the industry can actually keep up is by working through frameworks and regulations like PCI DSS to ensure that the right protections and the right controls are actually put in place. So, whether you're working for a bank, whether you're working for a merchant that takes payment information, whether you're working for a payment processor, it remains critical. So we want to help you keep up with these changes, and we want to try and ensure that you have tools available, and we want to help you use those tools and make them as accessible as possible so that you can not only keep up with regulation, but remember the reason why you're doing it, which is to protect my payment information. So anytime that you're filling out an assessment questionnaire or you're speaking to an auditor now for PCI DSS, you'll never be able to forget that you're doing it to protect Billy McDiarmid's payment information. The main two requirements that are new that we're going to talk about today are 4.2 and 4.2.1, 4.2.1.1. I'd be amiss if I didn't mention the requirement 5.4.1. It is not a certificate or PKI related requirement. It's related to email, and I'll touch on that briefly. Because Sift is very well known for on DMARC, the leading DMARC management and automation solution, do remember that a requirement of PCI DSS is that an organisation must have procedures and automated systems that are established to identify and safeguard staff from phishing attacks. DMARC, SPF, and DKIM are explicitly referenced within the guidelines. They are not mandated, I have to be very clear, but they are specifically referenced. And the reason for that is that DMARC and SPF and DKIM are the way of preventing impersonation attempts of your brand. Therefore, you're protecting your staff, you're protecting your customers, and you're protecting your supply chain from phishing attacks, okay? But that's not going to be the focus. We've done other sessions on DMARC, PCI DSS. Please do look them up on our blog and you'll be able to find them. Today, we're going to focus more on the certificate requirements. So two new requirements that are very important. First of all, certificates that are used to safeguard personal account numbers, so credit card information and bank information, during transmission over open public networks, over the internet. Those certificates must be confirmed as valid and not expired or revoked. Okay? So every certificate that is issued on the internet has got a lifetime. Those certificate lifetimes are dropping, okay, dropping considerably. It used to be that they could be years old, and now they can be no more than 1 year old. Standard lifetime for a certificate now is generally accepted to be 3 months, but soon it's going to be any shorter. And Let's Encrypt actually have certificate lifetimes now of just 6 days. Okay? So every certificate that you have in your estate that's used to safeguard PAN must be valid. And because of these short lifetimes, it's becoming harder and harder to actually track all of the certificates in use and to track that they are actually valid. And I'll come back to that more in a moment. Second requirement is an inventory of the entity's trusted keys and certificates that are used to protect PAN during transmission is maintained. Okay? So you must have an up-to-date list of all the certificates that are actually in use. You must keep that up to date. So you must have some way of being able to point to your auditor to that list of certificates that are actually in use. Now, thankfully, they actually go hand in hand. So requirement 4.2.1.1, you have to keep that inventory. Through the process of building that inventory, then you can actually begin to ensure that all your certificates are valid and not expired or revoked. Often, organizations do this manually. Okay. Even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a new prospect who's coming on board with Redshift, who, when I spoke about this, I asked, how do you keep an inventory of all your digital assets? Your domain names, your host names, your certificates, what are you doing? They say, well, certificates, we don't have that many of them, really, but they're tracked in a spreadsheet, and that's okay, but when it comes down to it, if something has been tracked in a spreadsheet, then being tracked in a spreadsheet means that someone has to maintain that and someone has to keep it up to date. What if that person who's keeping it up to date no longer works with the organization? What if they move on? What if there's some shadow IT? So what if someone within the organization starts to use a new product or service that requires a certificate and a new certificate is issued? Is the person who keeps that spreadsheet up to date, are they going to know about that new certificate? And importantly, if they don't know about that new certificate, then they're not going to be able to track the validity of that certificate. They're not going to be able to know whether that certificate is valid or whether it has expired. So just before I go into this in a little bit more detail, I just want to remind us though who has to meet these requirements. Okay. So just a reminder that PCI DSS applies to all entities that store, process, or transmit cardholder data. Okay. So it doesn't matter the size of the organization. It doesn't matter who they are. They are storing, processing, or transmitting and data. They have to be PCI DSS compliant. So that's everything from your mom and pop shop, who are selling their own gifts and wares, perhaps on their own store, right through to the largest merchants, the bricks and mortar stores processing payments. Anyone who does it has to be PCI DSS compliant. Right. But the level of compliance necessary does actually vary depending on the organization and how many payments they are actually processing. Organizations are acting as payment processors or merchants themselves that store or process or transmit a large number of transactions, more than 6 million a year. They must go through a more expensive process that's carried out by what's known as a QSA, a Qualified Security Assessor. Organizations that store, process, or transmit a lower number of transactions, however, may be able to self-test. Now, we are not PCI DSS experts. We can advise on these particular areas relating to PKI and relating to phishing. So there are other resources, plenty of sites out there and plenty of people you can speak to just double check on these requirements. But it is important that you understand, A, whether you need to be PCI DSS compliant, and if so, to actually what level you need to be. It may be that some organizations are doing more work than they need to, or it may be that some organizations just aren't doing enough work. So you've determined what level you need to be PCI DSS compliant at. You've determined what you need to actually do. So let's talk about these requirements, this PKI certificate-related requirements, in a bit more detail, and how it applies to your environment itself. Okay, so sometimes people that are involved in PCI DSS compliance, because it's not necessarily been their world, perhaps would understand the need for the TLS requirement. They don't understand why it's actually necessary. Certificates are there because it's all about trust. They're commonly known as TLS or SSL certificates. And the reason for that is they're in place to ensure that data on a website is actually correctly encrypted. Okay, so the certificate determines that the internet trusts that website because it's proven to the internet that it's using the correct level of encryption for the data that's being transmitted. So you are on eBay, you are buying a set of headphones, you are buying a new mobile phone, you're transmitting your payment information through eBay, through PayPal, you're transmitting your personal information. You want to make sure that that's encrypted, because if it's not encrypted, then someone, a bad actor out there, will be able to carry out a man-in-the-middle attack. They'll be able to get in between eBay, PayPal, and yourself, and they will be able to see your personal information. Now, TLS certificates are effectively are mandated now. Actually, not effectively mandated; they are mandated. It used to be that they weren't, but any site now really does need to have them, or else the internet won't trust that website. But they are complicated. Certificates are, because it's dealing with encryption and it's dealing with a chain of trust between the end organization and the internet itself. They are complicated, and they are subject to failure. As I mentioned earlier, certificates do only have a specific lifetime. They are not trusted forever. So it's important that organizations know when all their certificates are going to expire. It's important that they do that so that they can arrange for those certificates to be rotated, so that those certificates can actually be replaced. Because if a certificate is deployed and that certificate is invalid, then you can't guarantee trust in that certificate, you can't guarantee trust in that website, and you cannot guarantee trust that the data is encrypted. Okay, so the certificate isn't valid, the data isn't necessarily going to be encrypted, or you can't guarantee that it's been encrypted to the correct standards. Think about a certificate that's expired, or thinking about your driving license. If your driving license has expired, if you have not renewed your driving license, then the authorities don't know that you can actually drive. The same thing applies with certificate. If a certificate has expired, and you do not know that the certificate can be trusted and that the encryption can be trusted. Now, it's complicated. Certificates are problematic, and certificates do cause problems. But there are different ways that can be overcome. Now, a lot of organizations do quite often now automate the process of issuing certificates. So they use organizations like DigiCert, they use organizations like Sectigo, they use organizations that are known as certificate authorities, and the tools that they employ to automate this process and automate the process of issuing websites. But automation does fail. Okay? Automation cannot be fully relied on. And actually, often, even though there is some automation in place, a lot of the time certificates are still purchased and still issued manually. In any of those cases, there can be problems. There are common errors that happen that make the certificate invalid and make the certificate untrusted. Okay? If a certificate, as I said, if it expires, it's not trusted. But if a certificate is misconfigured, then it can also be untrusted as well. In either case, when a certificate is invalid or a certificate is misconfigured, then it could be open to attacks. Remember the reason why these regulations are in place in the first place. The reason why is to protect my payment information. You are protecting my credit card number. Okay, so if you don't have a valid certificate, my credit card number is probably not protected the way that it actually should be. So you need to make sure that you've got processes in place to ensure that certificates are valid and that certificates are configured correctly. Not just because PCI DSS does it, mandates it, but because it's the right thing to do. It's the essential thing to do to protect my payment information. So if you don't do this, okay, then it's going to lead to further problems. And This is why there is such a focus on certificates in PCI DSS. Okay, they've included the inventory requirement and included the validity requirement because there are more exploits actually happening. There are more vulnerabilities. Issues such as expirations that I've spoken about are now more common because the volume of certificates fired on a typical merchant website is now greater than ever. Think about it. The lifetime of certificates used to be a year. Most common lifetime of a certificate is now 3 months. That multiplies the number of certificates that are required by 4. Okay. The lifetime goes down further to 47 days, which is the current main proposal, or to even 7 days. They're becoming almost ephemeral at that point. That then multiplies the number of certificates by almost infinity. So there's more certificates, more problems. More certificates increases the attack surface. Okay, that means that most organizations have hundreds of thousands of certificates, and that increases the potential for exploitation because of poor certificate management. I mentioned organizations may have automation in place. Automation does fail. Okay? And where that happens, there are bad actors who are running passive scans on your web and email facing assets to detect whether there is a weak configuration, including whether the certificates are actually invalid or not. So there are bad actors out there who will exploit that. Okay, they will exploit vulnerabilities in deprecated certificates or untrusted certificate authorities to execute attacks. Okay, so the attack surface as well, this is another interesting point. The attack surface isn't just about the asset itself, i.e. the certificate. It's not just about the configuration of that certificate, but it's actually about who is issuing that certificate. Okay? Are they trusted? Should they be issuing certificates on your behalf? And there are a lot of ecosystem changes that happen within the certificate world that mean you have to monitor the attack surface. You have to monitor not only the certificates, but who is issuing certificates on your behalf. Also, monitoring certificates and who is issuing is something you should be doing in that case anyway. You should be using real-time new certificate alerts to know who in your organization is issuing certificates, why they're issuing certificates, okay, and whether they're actually authorized to issue certificates. So the other part is actually, if you detect a certificate that's issued and hasn't been, then on occasion, and there are particular attacks that have happened where it could have been spotted, if someone had checked whether a certificate was issued, it can be an indicator of compromise. Additionally, frameworks and guidelines such as PCI DSS, but also NIST and ISO are putting more focus as well on proper certificate management. They're emphasizing the importance of it and also the importance of asset inventory to avoid the vulnerabilities that can lead to attacks. But importantly, all of this that I'm talking about as well, not only can lead to attacks. For you as an organization, if a certificate expires and hasn't been replaced and you don't know about it, or if a certificate is misconfigured, then it can also lead to downtime on your website. It can also lead to downtime on your email service. That leads to financial repercussions. That leads to reputational damage. And actually, in some cases, it can lead to consequences. It can lead to fines from regulators. It can lead to problems with cyber insurance as well. Okay? So it's not just that, I have to tick this box to meet this requirement. If your certificates aren't managed correctly, there can be real consequences. And that takes me on to the final point here. There have been significant incidents over the years, including cases where expired certificates have caused downtime, that costly downtime, where untrusted certificates were used and actually exploited. Okay, it's led to man-in-the-middle attacks. So this isn't just a theoretical threat. This is actually a real threat. Now, in order to mitigate these threats and to mitigate these risks, defense on its own is no longer enough. The PCI DSS changes mean that you have to shift to a more proactive stance. You have to bring in more proactive security measures. Defense isn't going to be enough against this evolving breed of bad actors who can take advantage of weaknesses in your certificate estate. The defense alone on its own is no longer enough to stop people from taking advantage of weaknesses in your email estate. Okay? So the council have introduced these changes to, as I mentioned, to ensure that you keep up, with the bad actors and that you are using the defences that are available, but that you're proactively using these defences. And to remind you guys, as the heroes, remember that's what you are in this scenario, is that the battles against the guys are changing all the time. Technical controls themselves are not enough in isolation. You have to have visibility of all the risks. PCI DSS 4.0.1, added another zero there, was developed through extensive industry feedback. Like I mentioned, they didn't do this just to tick a box. They did it because it was actually required. When they went out and spoke to people, when they collaborated, they came together to highlight the importance of using encryption. They came together to highlight the importance of using anti-phishing measures such as email authentication as part of a strategy to do this, as part of a proactive strategy to protect my payment information. Again, just a reminder, you're doing this to protect my payment information. And this is where Redsift can help. And this is where Redsift can uniquely help. Because of the Redsift platform, Redsift is actually uniquely placed to help organizations be compliant with both the new certificate requirements and the new phishing protection requirements of PCI DSS. And the reason why we're uniquely placed to help is that our cybersecurity platform, Redsift Pulse, as a default, will automatically map and build an inventory of all the internet assets that you care about. So everything that you use, all of your domains, all of your subdomains, all of your host names, all of your IP addresses, and all of your certificates that you use to deliver payment services to your customers, Redsift will discover those continuously, automatically, and build out an inventory of them for you. So, linking that back to requirement 4.2.1.1, you will always have, an inventory of your certificates available to you. They will always be there continuously, so you don't need to panic during your audit. When the QSA comes to you and says, do you have an inventory of all your certificates? You don't have to log into multiple portals. You don't have to go to that spreadsheet anymore. You can log into Redsift and you can show off. Like I mentioned, though, through that process of inventorying all your certificates, you're not just saying certificate 1, certificate 2, you're actually grabbing all of the important information that you need to know about your certificates, including that validity period. So you have an inventory and you know when all your certificates are due to expire. Now that in itself is a great start, and if you do that, you're much further ahead of many organisations in the same situation as you are. But what if a certificate does need to be replaced? Do you think it would be useful to receive reminders and to receive alerts about those certificates? Well, that's where Redshift does come in as well. Redshift certificates will send you email notifications to tell you about a certificate that's due to expire and hasn't been replaced yet. So that will help you to meet requirement 4.2.1. You must have all your certificates that are used in the transmission of PAN must be valid. They must not be expired. Okay? So we can send you notifications to tell you when they're going to expire. And we will then send you notifications they have not been replaced and have not been renewed. So again, this is about doing this properly. This isn't just about ticking the box and saying, oh, I've got an inventory. This is about saying, well, I've got my inventory. I know that all my certificates are valid, but importantly, I also have measures in place that tell me when a certificate is due to expire. Now, just to finish off, let me move over into a short demonstration. If there's any questions, this is a great time to let me know while I figure out how to share my screen today. Yeah. Now, first thing I actually just want to point out to you is if you go to redshift.com and if you go to free tools, what you'll actually notice is that we have got a free solution that you can actually use. Redshift Certificates Lite is a perfect solution for small organizations who need to A, keep an inventory of all their certificates, and B, need to know when their certificates are due to expire. Okay. So if you are self-attesting, if you are self-assessing your compliance with PCI DSS, and if you are asked, do you have a certificate inventory and are all of your certificates valid? Then if you have less than 250 certificates in your estate, then you can sign up to Redshift Certificates Lite. It's completely free of charge, no obligation to purchase any other features. Okay? You can sign up and you're up and running in around half an hour. And we will continuously and automatically build that inventory of certificates, and we will automatically send you alerts 7 days before the renewal date so that you know that it's due to expire and you can take appropriate action. Also, though, from Redshift Certificates Lite, customers often realise that after they've started that process, they might realise that they've got more certificates than 250. They might realise that they need more features. And this is where Redshift Certificates, the fully paid version of Redshift Certificates Lite, comes to play. What you can see here is the certificate dashboard that gives a complete picture of customer certificate inventory, what certificates are due to expire, and what certificates have expired and have not been replaced. This continuously and automatically stays up to date so that you don't require administration time or analyst time to build out this inventory. We find all of the host names. As I mentioned, the domains, subdomains that are hosting web and email services, we do that automatically for you so that you don't have to. We then find all of the certificates that can be associated with those host names, with those domains and subdomains, so that you don't have to. At any time, you can visit the page and you can see how many certificates are due to expire. So I can see here that there's 2 certificates that are due to expire. I think they've already been replaced. So that's why they're not showing. But I can see if I click on 162 renewals, then I can see everything that's due to come up over the next period of time, for example. Importantly as well, I mentioned that you should track every new certificate that's issued. That's so that you can check for policy breaches, and that's so that you know that certificates are being issued when they should be. We track every single certificate that has been issued, tell you about it, and we send you email alerts to tell you about it as well. Now, importantly as well, it may be that you want to know about certificate expirations before they're actually due to expire. And as I mentioned, Redshift Certificates Lite does that. It will tell you 7 days beforehand, but maybe you want to know longer in advance. Maybe you want to know 2 weeks in advance. Maybe you want to know 30 days in advance. Well, with Redshift Certificates, with the paid version, you can customize when you receive your certificate alerts as well. You receive those alerts by email, or you can use our API and feed those into your toolset. It may be that your security team wants to bring those into their scene and start to automate the process of replacing those certificates. So you can see here how effective and how transparent can be with your certificate estate using Redshift certificates. You can very quickly have complete visibility of all the certificates that are in use across your estate, including those that are responsible for ban. You will be up and running in minutes with Redshift certificates. Not days, not weeks, like some of our competitors. A typical customer will be up and running in around half an hour with our tooling. So it's very simple, very quick, very easy to get to the point where you have that required insight to meet your PCI DSS requirements. Remember, you're a small organization with under 250 certificates, you can use Redshift Certificates Lite as well. Okay, super. So I think I've just about finished for today. I'm just going to check if there are any questions so far. Okay, so I do have one question that's come in. Someone has asked, thanks very much for this. It's a great point. Don't all or most organisations, don't you all just use one certificate authority, one place that actually issues certificates? And that's a really, really valid question. Actually, that's a really, really good point to actually ask. So I just realised my webcam isn't working for some reason now. I'm just going to try and get my webcam in, but for some reason it's crashed, so I'll just plug on regardless. So, really good question, actually. Most organisations don't realise how many certificate organisations or certificate authorities are actually in use. They don't know that because of the use of third-party certificates in their estate, for example. So third-party payment processors that actually depend issue certificates that the organisation depends on. And we typically find that most organisations will have 4 or maybe 5 certificate authorities in use. Typically, that would be DigiCert, Entrust, or Sectigo, and then probably the cloud providers. So Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, those type of services. So typically speaking, most organisations don't really know actually how many certificate authorities are in use. So if they don't know what certificate authorities are actually in use, then they don't know where to go and find their certificates. Really, really good question. Thank you. I've got another question. Aren't now most certificates issued automatically? Our organisation uses cloud providers, and those cloud providers, when a service is spun up, they will give us the option to issue the certificate at the same time and then automatically replace it when it expires. Yes, I mean, there's significant automation in place that helps organisations to keep up with the certificate estate. There absolutely is. But we do see, even in those organisations who have estates of certificates that are mainly automated, and we have some checks that we have in place to check whether a certificate is manually renewed or whether it's automatically renewed, so we can generally tell the numbers. And sometimes it's high. Sometimes 90+% of certificates in a state are actually automated. But automation does fail downstream. Sometimes a certificate is issued but not correctly installed and not correctly deployed. Yeah. Sometimes a certificate is misconfigured. Okay. Sometimes someone misses an alert that they were supposed to action to help trigger the automation. So it is pretty crucial as well that you still have the right level of automation in place to pick up when automation itself fails. And this is where Redshift certificates is the catch-all. Okay, it's completely agnostic. It doesn't matter what certificate authorities that you actually have in use. It doesn't matter what certificate authorities you rely on and you depend on. We will find all of the public certificates for those. So you will, if the automation does fail, you will be able to detect the certificate has failed its renewal. So we're firm believers that, yeah, you need to use the solutions that are offered by your certificate authorities or the cloud providers or the certificate lifecycle management tools that are out there, things like Verify and AppViewX and KeyFactor. Yeah, they're absolutely great solutions. We do believe that you shouldn't just rely on one solution, and we have significant customers, some of the largest organizations out there who have these solutions, but also utilize Redshift because they want to have that catch-all. They want to have that security policy in place, that insurance policy in place. Well, great, we're just coming up on time. Thank you to everyone who has joined. We will be sending out the recording afterwards so that everyone has it. Do get in touch with me. If you have any further questions, you can get me on email, billy.mcdiarmid@redshift.io or through LinkedIn. Remember, you can sign up for the free version of Redshift certificates, Redshift certificates Lite at redshift.com. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.